Good afternoon, family. Welcome to the Message in the Middle. I'm so glad you've taken just a few moments out of your day to receive information and inspiration that's relevant to our lives. We don't want you to keep this experience to yourself, so if you are logged on through Facebook, I want you to share this Facebook Live and start a watch party so that your network can know what's happening right now. Also, if you're watching via YouTube, click the bell, become a subscriber so that you can receive notifications whenever we upload new content. So we are coming to the close of Black History Month, and we are going to end a two-part series today about I love the Black church. I just love it. And I felt this is an important discussion for a number of reasons. First, the Black church has been one of the most important institutions created and sustained by African American people. In a very real sense, much of Black history is intertwined with the Black church. You'll see as we move forward in this discussion that I hope would not stop your study, that this is the case. But secondly, this is an important study, particularly for Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, because we are a history-making congregation. We're going to make history this year as we will reach 100 years of ministry. I want to be clear as I start today what I mean when I speak about the Black church. I go back to the definition I gave you last time from William D. Watley in his contribution to Singing the Lord's Song in a Strange Land, the African American Church and Ecumenism. He gives this following description. The African American churches are primarily the independent and indigenous institutions of a third world people in a first world context. They are the creations of a domestically colonized people of primarily African descent whose social location is the white West, but whose mission is international. These are the churches that African Americans have built from the bricks they have made, even as they gather their own straw. The last time we were together, we talked about the ingenuity of the African American church. We spoke of how we embraced the practice and faith of Christianity on our own terms in the midst of enslavement. And although we were enslaved, we birthed the Black church in North America as the invisible institution. In the Northeast, the Black church would come into existence as Richard Allen and Absalom Jones broke from the white Methodists who would not allow them full participation in their churches. In 1792, they would found the first African church in Philadelphia. Years later, slavery would be the issue that would not only bring the nation into the Civil War, but would also divide the church in North America. So it's understandable that out of slavery, African American churches began to proliferate, particularly in cities in the Northeast and in the South. Now I want you to put your mind around the reality that when formerly enslaved African Americans emerged from slavery, they literally had nothing. I mean, literally nothing. There was no mention of reparations for them. There was no savings account for them to pull from, didn't have an uncle to give them $1 million to get going. And although this notion of 40 acres and a mule was a proposition, they did not own any land of their own. This is partly what birthed this practice called sharecropping, which is an entirely other conversation. But I hope you get the point of what I'm trying to say. Our forefathers and foremothers had nothing but the shoes on their feet and the clothes on their backs. Among the first ways African Americans were organized with their new freedom was around the religious institution we now call the Black church. What I want to use the balance of our time today to do is to put our minds around that churches did more than just organize for the purpose of facilitating corporate worship and for the purpose of Christian education. The church became the center, I would even say the epicenter, of the post-enslaved community. Therefore, it is no secret that beyond providing religious services and charity, the Black church became the place of the creation of so much that defined, or what we would define as Black life. We can talk about it musically. We can talk about musicians and orators, even movements, which all emanated from the Black church. I want to narrow my focus for this talk to highlighting two aspects of the impact of the Black church, particularly as it relates to spurring along economic empowerment and the development of educational institutions. I want to talk about how African American churches played a pivotal role in birthing black businesses. The best way that I can do so is to tell the story that is closely linked to who we are as Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church. I would call him principal or leading founder, is Dr. J.E. Walker, who organized, along with several other members, Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church Disciples of Christ in 1921. As I stated earlier, this year will be our centennial. 2 years after he organized Mississippi Boulevard, he went on to organize Universal Life Insurance Company in September of 1923. It was the second African-American company in the United States to attain million-dollar capital status, and he did it by 1947. It has been described as one of the top 10 Negro-owned and operated business enterprises in the world, and as the cornerstone of Negro business enterprise and financial initiative in the entire Mid-South. Universal's founding goal to build a service institution that would give jobs and financial assistance to our people. This was realized through its use of assets for civic improvements, educational scholarships, and mortgage funds. So we can see Walker, who was a churchman, take the lead in the founding of Universal Life Insurance in a time where many African Americans only had access to participate in what we would consider life insurance, but what were called burial societies. In 1946, Walker, along with his son, A. Maceo Walker, founded Tri-State Bank that's still in operation until this day. They pioneered signature loans, real estate loans, and church loans, particularly specified for African Americans that didn't need an endorsement from a white person. These two churchmen would be important during the civil rights struggle. They would allow the bank's boardroom to be used for meetings during the civil rights movement, and they would keep the bank vault open at night to bail out protesters who had been jailed. Now, we can go all across this country from the time of the Reconstruction up to the present and find African American churches that have participated in economic empowerment. We can talk about churches who've been involved in real estate development to create affordable housing and jobs, such as Greater Allen Cathedral AME Church in Jamaica, Queens, New York. Or we can talk about how Windsor Village United Methodist Church did the same thing in Houston, Texas. You can even go to Maryland, where before Bishop Vashti McKenzie became the first female to become a bishop in the AME Church, where she organized churches to mobilize their banking power. And the point is this, that more than being of religious significance, black churches harness the power of our community into something quite productive. They were engaged in economic empowerment, but we also know what has empowered our people is education. And I want to talk about how we participated in the development of black colleges and universities. And again, I want to tell the story about how this has happened for black disciples. Jarvis Christian College is an HBCU that is expressly affiliated with the Christian Church Disciples of Christ since the time of its founding. It started out as Jarvis Christian Institute. It was modeled after the Southern Christian Institute of Edwards, Mississippi. It was founded in 1913 with an enrollment of 12 students, all in the elementary grades. The history actually goes back to 1904 when the Negro disciples in the state of Texas began planning for a school for black youth. The black Disciples of Christ in Texas were to raise $1,000 for a school. The Christian Women's Board of Missions was going to contribute $10,000 if they raised $1,000. And then they went to Virginia, a lady named Virginia Hearn, who was the state secretary for women's work, convinced Miss Ida Van Zant Jarvis of the need for a school for black youth. And this is when the story gets amazing. In turn, Mrs. Jarvis worked to persuade her husband, Major James Jones Jarvis, to donate land where the school was going to be built. In 1910, Major and Mrs. Jarvis deeded, get this, 456 acres of land near Hawkins, Texas, to the Christian Women's Board of Missions on the condition, and I want you to get this quote, it keep up and maintain a school for the elevation and education of the Negro race, in which school there shall be efficient religious and industrial training. So part of the spirit of this donation was the idea that the land was going to be used to educate, head, heart, and hand, as they say, to produce, as they would say, useful citizens and earnest Christians. And although the thrust of the educational program has developed over the years since the school was started, they keep head, heart, and hand at the center of it all. Stories told that shortly after the land was donated, the Negro disciples of Christ in Texas, largely through the efforts of the women of the churches, successfully completed their fundraising campaign. This is what happened in the Christian church disciples of Christ with the collective power of the black church. But this also has happened in many other places where the black church was the foundation that built our academic institutions of higher learning. And I want to call the roll just a few names. Paul Quinn College, Morris Brown College, the famed Morehouse College, Shaw University are all a testament of how the African American church was invested in building institutions to educate our community. So listen, as we come to the end of our time, I just wanted to whet your appetite on this subject matter. I want to leave you with some resources that will help you to do further study on the black church. First, a recent contribution to the study of the black church has been the documentary put together by Dr. Henry Louis Gates called The Black Church. This is our story. This is our song. This will be a great starting point for anybody who wants to know more about the African American church. It's currently streaming on Prime Video. I'm not making an endorsement, just telling you where to find it. You can also pick up the book by the same name. You can find more information from this short listing of books I want to give to you. First, a book I would just tell you to get is a sociological study of the African American church. It's called The Black Church and the African American Experience. It's written by Dr. C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence Mamiya. Then also a text that I referenced last week by Dr. Albert RABOTEAU called Slave Religion. That'll give you good insight of what it was for slaves to participate in a religious experience during the time of their enslavement. And then there's a great piece for you to read called The Black Church in the Post-Civil Rights Era by Anthony PINN. This is a good book if you want to know what happened after all the sit-ins, after all the mass meetings that happened at black churches. What happened when there were no longer clergy leading the movement? So I encourage you, brothers and sisters, to study to show yourself approved, to spend some time learning about the history of the African American church. And I guarantee you, if you take the time to learn the history of the African American church, you have a greater appreciation of this awesome community that we're all a part of. I want to thank you for your time on this afternoon. I hope you will join us on this Sunday for Heritage Sunday. The Umoja experience is going to be a phenomenal time as we bring our celebration of African American history to a close as people of faith here at Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. If you want to link up with what we're doing here in our church and want to become part of our community of believers, you can send an email to connect@theboulevard.org, or you can text us. Text the word belong to 901-446-4242. And one final note, we want you to know and want you to spread the word that the Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church broadcast is back on the air on Fox 13 Sunday mornings at 10 a.m. before you log on for our 10:30 a.m. worship experience. Have an awesome rest of this day. Know that I love you, and there's nothing you can do about that.